Now, speaking of Russia and Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, you got the anniversary, Jacob, I believe, December 25th. Russia went into Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It's a prominent day for Russians. I have to double check exactly what year it was, but it lives in infamy, or
89.
89. Okay. It's when
yeah.
79,
79,
right?
79. My apologies, 79.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of, I'm not getting into rumors, but there's a lot of people that speculated, because Russia holds this December 25th, and granted, they're Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, their Christmas is sort of like in first week of January.
January 6th and 7th, yes.
Yeah. December 25th is not an issue for them. Not that it would be matter anyway, but that they would do it again tomorrow. That the Eastern Ukraine, now Ukraine is building trenches along the border. There's NATO troops in Bulgaria, Romania. We got F-15s in Romania, 175,000 troops. I think David told me that they increased that number over last night. It seems to me it could happen at any time. The domino can flip at any time.
You see, it's posturing. It's posturing. If I was to talk about strategic reality right now, what I would say is the warfare already underway is cyber warfare. The NSA attacking Russia, Russia attacking the United States or the West. Second thing I would say is the United States still has the keys to the car. It can control the SWIFT system, the international banking and payment system. It can deal Russia out of that equation. It can deal China out of that equation. It can deal any country out of that equation. Now, you've got slimeball governments like Germany and Merkel and people like this who would rather placate China and Russia. But if they get in enough trouble themselves, what are they going to do? The United States still has the keys. But of course, when you have a driver who's lost his license due to age and had to forfeit his license because he's too old to drive, Biden, you got a problem. Something I would point people to, and I hope people will read it on Moriel TV Facebook page or on Be Alert or on the Moriel website or on RTN, is this week's editorial of the week by Ruben Rothler.
That's right.
And he talked about the geriocracy or geriantry of the last days of the Soviet Union, when the Soviets surrendered in Afghanistan, and you had all these old men in the Kremlin who were holding on to ideologies that didn't work, and it was all imploding. And when the next generation came along, led by the Gorbachev and these other ones who wanted perestroika and glasnost, the damage had been so extensive they couldn't save the Soviet Empire.
That's true.
Warsaw Pact collapse, then the CIS collapse, and then the Soviet Union collapse, and then the CIS collapse. Well, you've got the same thing now. You've got they were all old men in the Kremlin, Cherenko and Andropov, and going back to Brezhnev and Suslov and Kosygin, they were all old men from Stalin's era. And when Stalin went, they needed a token clown to replace Stalin for political reasons. So they got the court gesture. They got the buffoon in residence. They got Nikita Khrushchev.
Yeah.
And they had to control Khrushchev because he was always saying stupid things. Like when he came to New York and pounded his shoe on the podium at the UN and said, "We will bury you," and things like this. He was a nut. He was not really in control. And they eventually had to get rid of him. But you had all these other old men. They were just holding on to ideologies and 5-year plans that didn't work. And it became unsalvageable. Well, now you've got the same thing. Maxine Waters, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Feinstein. These are all people in their 80s.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah,
some people can be fairly younger than 80, but not those people. And they're holding on to these ideologies that don't work. Okay. And instead of a 5-year plan, like with Stalin, they have this Green New Deal and Build Back Better. They're doing the same kind of things. They surrender in Afghanistan the way the Soviets did, which marked a downfall. And as the CIS began to collapse and fragment with the fragmentation of the Soviet Union, you got the same with the red states and the blue states in the USA now. They're doing the same exact thing. And the next generation of Democrats who are coming up and back of this Senior Citizens Committee are not going to be able to save it. Certainly not the party. The party collapsed. Can America be saved? That's a question. Can the party be saved? No. I would strongly recommend people read the editorial of the week by Reuben Rothler this week. Reuben Rothler is a believer who's a lawyer. And his editorials are well worth reading. Please read it. If you really want to understand what's going on and what's likely to happen in the forthcoming year, read the editorial of the week by Reuben Rothler.
Yeah, I think the melting of financial markets, the printing of just infinitum of Build Back Better, it's going to come to, chickens come to roost. But speaking of Russia, Jacob, I mean, you have them. I know you're talking about posturing. People have underestimated Russia and the threat. I don't think they're threatening if they're not really wanting to do something there. And I think the issue with Taiwan, it is because of the security alliance with India and China. I think China is on the horizon. They have Taiwan on the horizon. Russia has, of course, Ukraine on the horizon, possibly annexing the eastern part of Ukraine, like Crimea. But another hotspot, Iran. Iran, just like the other two nations that I just talked about, they're not really too scared of what the UN Security Council is going to do or the U.S. Security Council is going to do. They just had that meeting with Bennett and Sullivan. Nothing really got done.
Sullivan admitted that Vienna has stalled and the Iranians are becoming more and more aggressive. Again, they smell blood because they see a weak, basically spineless president who's not in full control of his mental faculties in the Oval Office, and Harris was even weaker and more incompetent. So they don't have anything to fear, and they're pushing ahead aggressively. The United States is trying to prevent Israel, obviously, from taking a unilateral action. But there's more there than meets the eye because the Israeli Air Force is still highly reliant on American support technology for the F-35. And without the F-35, any Israeli airborne incursion into Iran cannot really take place effectively. So there's more going on in those negotiations, and there are negotiations. They're not just discussions with Sullivan. And Sullivan is no friend of Israel.
No, not at all. This is the scary part. And of course, we're talking biblical prophecy here. We're talking Israel being isolated, Israel being put in a spot where they have to respond. We got these wars coming up. The Bible speaks of wars. The Bible speaks of an invasion in Israel. Iran has been on the forefront this week because they're conducting scenarios.
Military exercises. Which are naval, aerial, and ballistic guided missiles.
It's fire 16 ballistic missiles able to hit Israel. They're testing them, but they got 16. They said that we're able to hit it. We're able to hit Israel. There's some major problems there. And of course, the UN just, we talked about the resolutions for 2021. They just brought out their numbers. I think they did 19 resolutions overall, 2021. Do you want to guess, Jacob, how many of them?
One against North Korea, one against Syria, one against Iran, 14 against Israel. Countries engaged in open genocide against their own people, the most unspeakable human rights abuses against their own citizens and threatening other countries. Iran, and North Korea, and Syria, what they've done to their own population. Oh, they just get one resolution against them each. Israel, for defending itself, gets 14. Again, Zechariah 12, the nations will come against Israel. Well, read Zechariah 12. They are the personal enemies of Christ. The United Nations has made itself the personal enemy of Jesus Christ, and he has made the United Nations his personal enemy. Who do you think is going to win?
Amen. Well, Jesus is coming to fight against the United Nations, no doubt. They just set up a committee about the war in the Gaza war, in the confrontation. They're called the Guardian of the Walls, which was, of course, the operation that Israel called. They're going to investigate it for crimes against humanity. Again, the UN is all about peace, but they're regulating and resolutions against the one country that they don't.
You know what? Except for about 8 miles of it, that barrier is a fence. It's not a wall. The only area it's a wall is outside of Jerusalem, on the south side of Jerusalem, and I've driven on it many times. And it is where the Islamic terrorists were shooting rifles at school buses. And so they built a wall to stop the bullets. The rest of it is a fence, and the fence was put up to stop terror, to stop the massive suicide bombings that killed a couple of thousand people. So you won't let us murder your children waiting for a school bus? You won't let us come in and kill you? You're violating our human rights. I hate the United Nations.
You're absolutely right, Jacob. Absolutely right, without a doubt. The UN, it was what formed in 45. It's supposed to keep peace on the earth. Peace and security was their slogan, along with the IMF and the World Bank. They provided nothing but death and destruction. We'll talk about another time, Jacob, the war in the Balkans, which is something that a lot of people are not talking about. But Bosnia and Herzegovina, they're going to split. It's going to split that nation. The Serbs, Bosnia, Croatia, that thing has been a powder keg. And of course, we have Bill Clinton to thank by bombing the Christians there in the Danube River when they were being persecuted by the Muslims. Of course, they're blaming Serbia for doing genocide, but it was actually the other way around. Now that is a hot cake. And guess who's coming to the aid of the Serbs? Russia.
Traditionally, it was Russia, yes.
Yeah.
Let's remember something. Javier Solano, Wesley Clark, and above all, Bill Clinton and Tony Blair are war criminals. You want to put somebody on trial in The Hague as a war criminal? Tony Blair. Not Milosevic, Tony Blair. Bill Clinton. Wesley Clark was commander of NATO, and Javier Solana, the EU.
Yeah.
They're the war criminals. The NATO charter says NATO can only attack a country that attacks a NATO country. They did not attack a NATO country. It was completely illegal. Bill Clinton is nothing but a war criminal. Tony Blair is a war criminal.
Yeah, I would add that Madeleine Albright to that list because
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But again, Jacob, you mentioned many times, watch for those Balkan areas. This is where major wars have started. Dominoes have started there.
That goes back to where the Roman Empire split between the Latin West and the Greek East, and it's always been that way.
Yeah. Again, what most people is focus on Ukraine. I think the issue is going to be in the Balkans, and that's going to perhaps NATO will be involved again, and another issue with Russia.
Well, blessings in Jesus, dear friends. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your prayers, your support, certainly. But above all, we appreciate the grace of the Lord in having you be with us. If you are blessed, edified, challenged, encouraged by what you have been hearing on Moriel, we would certainly ask you to subscribe, to give us a thumbs up, and to tell your Christian friends about us. and even tell your unsaved friends about us in the hope and prayer they will hear the gospel and become Christians. Thank you so very much. My name is James Draker Prash, Moriel Ministries. God bless you all.